What's up, bro? Today we're going to do something about DNA. There is 8.3 billion people on this earth. More importantly, there's 348 million people in the US. 51 million of those people is black. Now, DNA. Why are y'all so easily giving away the most precious thing that's been given to you from the Most High? You can be able to check your family history in so many different ways, but this is proving a point. We've been programmed to try to look for the easiest way to do things when that is not the way to do things. Back in the day, it used to be do things the hard way the first time until you can find an easier way. And even when you found that easier way, it was similar the hard way. You learn that in time. That's why each generation is to teach the next generation to make things that much easier for them. But now people are just giving away personal information, your DNA. That's like going up to a stranger and saying, "Hey, would you like to know my credit card number so you can be able to buy that couch? Hey, would you like my debit card number so you can be able to go ahead and buy that gas that you need with gas prices as high as they are?" And you keep believing it time and time again. Time and time again. Stop, people. I'm going to give you all the information you need. Some of you don't even understand the point of doing a DNA. More importantly, you do not know the fact that they're taking your DNA, laughing at you, and then sharing that information to governments, defense departments, pharmaceuticals. What do you think they do with that? Maybe make a new pill for you to take, maybe figure out a new virus for them to give out to you. Who knows? Hypothetically speaking, all this is just for educational purposes. I don't typically have to say that. But in this case, people, stop. 8.3 billion. More importantly, to the 348 million here on the Holy Land, they're collecting your personal information and you're freely giving it to them. And I'm going to prove the point that it's all fake.
It's a true story. It's a true story. I would lie to make you laugh, but I'm telling you a true story. So I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her a Zulu, man. you know? I said, you back there making it up anyway. Nobody believe you could take some spit and figure out a tribe? What are you, crazy? So anyway, I was a Nubian and it was cool. Well, here's the miracle, one of the many miracles, thank God, that happened in my life. I got up in the middle of the night, and to be honest, I have to tell you the truth, I got up to go to the bathroom. And I was standing there in the bathroom, minding my own business. And I had an idea. And here's what was the idea. I would take this passion I had from the time I was 9 years old in genealogy, and I would get 8 prominent African Americans, and I would trace their family tree back into the abyss of slavery, back to the time when the paper trail disappears, because inevitably it disappears for all of us.
Disappears for all of us, he claims. If anybody's been doing their genealogy, you'll find out that as you go back in time, boy, I butchered that word. Y'all will find out that I butcher a lot of words. I read better than actually I do anything else. Who is Louis Gates? Louis Gates, as y'all know, is, he studied at Harvard. Smart guy. I give him that. He's very smart. And I like this suit. But more importantly, he's the gentleman who once before went through this scenario. Y'all remember Beer Gate, right? You remember Beer Gate? Yeah. Before Beergate, I mean, didn't nobody really know about it, but then all of a sudden, you know, as you see that day in this story here, 2009, cop went to his house. He was just a brother trying to get in his crib. As he was trying to get into his crib, somebody walked by, as we like to say, white tea person or something. Looked like he was breaking in, and then in the process of that, he's inside the house, gets to the crib. Sure enough, cops show up on the scene, and they realize, okay, everything checks out here. But then, as he, is cool, he keeps following this dude according to what the cop said. He kept, he just followed me. He was arrested after following me outside of the house because he kept just talking to him and causing a ruckus, and to the point where, as this cop is like leaving, he followed him outside, and then next thing you know, went to a whole nother level of him finally just getting arrested for being being out of control. You can read this article for yourself. Check up in them. Yeah, put them on the scene. Then the next thing you know, even as you read to the top part of this, it really become a big thing until who said something? Mr. Obama. When the president speaks about you, you become somebody. Next, you know, there's Beergate. It ends peacefully, but sure enough, as you heard him say, he went into something that he had an idea about, something he loved, he was passionate about, trying to help his people. No problem with that. I'm here to help all my people, especially ones on this holy earth. We are being attacked, and this attack is worldwide, from data centers to food, worldwide. But today, DNA tests. Stop giving away your information. Let me show you why.
Two sisters take the same DNA test. The results show that one sister is 10% French, the other 0%. Both sisters share the same two parents and therefore the same set of ancestors. So how can one be 10% more French than the other? Tests like these rely on our DNA to answer questions about our ancestry. But our DNA actually can't tell us everything about who we are or where we're from. DNA tests are great at answering some questions, like who your parents are, but can provide baffling results to others, like whether you have ancestors from a particular region. To understand why, it helps to know where our DNA comes from in the first place. Each person's DNA consists of about 6 billion base pairs stored in 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 total. That may seem like a dizzying amount of information, but 99% of our genome is shared among all humans. The remaining 1% contains everything distinct about an individual's ancestry. Commercial DNA tests utilize less than 1% of that 1%. One chromosome in each pair comes from each parent. These halves join at conception when a sperm and egg, each with only 23 chromosomes, combine. The story of our ancestry becomes muddled before conception. That's because the 23 chromosomes in a sperm or egg aren't identical to the chromosomes of every other cell in the body. As they go from a cell with 46 chromosomes to a sex cell with only 23, the chromosomes within each pair swap some sections. This process is called recombination, and it means that every sperm or egg contains single chromosomes that are a unique mashup of each pair. Recombination occurs uniquely in each sex cell, making two sisters' chromosomes different not only from their parents, but from each other's. Recombination happens before conception, so you get exactly half of your DNA from each parent. But going further back, things get more complicated. Without recombination, you would get a quarter from each grandparent, an eighth from each great-grandparent, and so on. But because recombination happens every generation, those numbers vary. The more generations removed an ancestor is, the more likely they won't be represented in your DNA at all. For example, without recombination, just 1/64th of your DNA would come from each ancestor 6 generations back. Because of recombination, that number can be higher, though we don't know for sure how high, or it can be as low as 0. So one sister isn't more French in the sense of having more ancestors from France. Instead, the French ancestors are simply more represented in her DNA. But the story doesn't end there. The tests don't trace the DNA of the sister's actual French ancestors. We don't have access to the genomes of deceased individuals from previous generations. Instead, these results are based on a comparison to the DNA of people living in France today. The tests look for genetic markers or combinations of genetic markers. These markers are short sequences that appear in specific places. The sister deemed more French shares genetic markers with people currently living in France. The assumption is that these shared markers indicate ancestors from the same place, France. It's important to note that results are based on people who've had their genomes sequenced, 80 to 90% of which are of European descent. Many indigenous peoples are barely represented, if at all. The test won't reveal heritage from people not represented in the database and shouldn't be used to prove race or ethnicity. And as more people get sequenced, your results might change. Looking further back, you may get a result like 2% Neanderthal. Though Neanderthals were a separate species from humans, that 2% doesn't come out of the 99% of our genome shared among all humans, but the 1% that varies. That's because about 40,000 years ago, certain human populations interbred with Neanderthals, meaning some people alive today have Neanderthal ancestors. Many Neanderthal ancestors, in fact. There are so many generations in 40,000 years that a single Neanderthal's genetic contribution would be untraceable. You can be both 100% French and 2% Neanderthal. Though both come from the 1% of DNA that makes us different, they're accounting for different things. Looking for traces of our ancestry in our DNA gets complicated very quickly. Both the way we inherit DNA and the information available for testing makes it difficult to say certain things with 100% certainty. When you think of the discovery of DNA, you probably think of two names, Watson and Crick, but there is a third, unsung scientist whose name you should know.
And there you have it. Now you know what that is. Now you really know what DNA is. And that's important to know. 1% from 99%. And then to rewind the clock all the way back and start telling you this is your great, 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 great grandma out of Nigeria. or you come from the Zulu, or no, they're taking people from today, taking all of that information, and then doing mathematical calculations to say that your DNA is similar to their DNA in certain areas. And all it really tells them is what in time I'm going to tell you, and that is the truth about the slave trade and who really came over here, true history. Because everything, to all you 8.3 billion people, and actually it's smaller than that, because over there, some of y'all have this truth, but you're not going to go and tell us Central American people who are living, 348 million of us who believe in the slave trade narrative because it was given to us in textbooks to believe. And because of such, so many people hang on to it. But worldwide, y'all believe it too, or there wouldn't be no such thing as YT superiority, because it's all fake. It's all a lie. And it all starts from that very simple place up out of Africa. Oh, no, it's called the out of Africa theory. Yeah.
So I called Malefi first thing. I said, Malefi, I just got my results back. I am a Nubian. Where are you from? I am the true African prince. My friend Anthony Appiah, whose uncle was the Asantehene, the king of the Asante people. When Rick Kittle sent me a certificate announcing I was Nubian, Anthony Appiah looked at it and said, what a ton of rubbish. Now, why would he say that? Well, there's a slight problem with being either Zulu or Nubian if you're African American. You know what the problem is? None of our ancestors who came here in slavery came from South Africa, the Zulu people, or from Nubia. None, zero. Egypt is over here. The slaves came from the area from Senegal down to Angola. 97% of the slaves came from that region, all right? So you know how long it would take them to walk from Sudan to Senegal or to Angola? It just didn't happen. So I looked at Anthony and I said, you're just jealous. Because I am a Nubian prince. I didn't care. I had it framed. I put it up in my living room so everybody could see that I'm from royalty. So I didn't think about it. I thought maybe it was on a trade route. You know, there were great Muslim trade routes. You know, today, this is important for the students. In my time, we were taught that the Africans were these benighted people, and they were too stupid to build a boat or to be curious about the world and cross the Sahara Desert. It was rubbish. Africans were just as curious as anybody else. The Sahara Desert was a highway. It wasn't a barrier. So I thought, well, and there were great trade routes. So I thought maybe my Nubian descendant had come over and ended up being tricked by some white man and ended up in Maryland or Virginia or something. So that was cool. And if I needed an interpretation, believe me, I could have produced one. So, and by the way, you know, the Zulu thing, when Oprah was finally in the first series, and we gave her a DNA test, basically the next day she went to South Africa to announce that she was opening what became the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy. She was in an auditorium like 75,000 people or something, and she announced that she just had the test and that she was Zulu. So it broke on CNN. I was sitting in my living room minding my own business and said, Oprah Winfrey's a Zulu. So I called Rick Kittles, and I said, Rick, did you tell Oprah she was a Zulu? He goes, no, man, she made that up herself. It's a true story. It's a true story. I would lie to make you laugh, but I'm telling you a true story. So I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her a Zulu, man. You know? I said, you back there making it up anyway. Nobody believe you can take some spit and figure out a tribe? What are you, crazy? So anyway, I was a Nubian and it was cool. Well, here's the miracle, one of the many miracles, thank God, that happened in my life. I got up in the middle of the night, and to be honest, I got up to go to the bathroom. And I was standing there in the bathroom, minding my own business. And I had an idea. And here's what was the idea. I would take this passion I had from the time I was 9 years old in genealogy, and I would get 8 prominent African Americans, and I would trace their family tree back into the abyss of slavery, back to the time when the paper trail disappears, because inevitably it disappears for all of us, all of our ancestors. It just wasn't a paper trail. You can't trace people, there's no printed record. And then when the paper trail disappears, I would do their DNA and tell them where they were from in Africa. I was so excited. I had tears in my eyes. And I couldn't wait till the next day. The next day, I called my buddy Quincy Jones. Now, Quincy is like a vampire. Quincy is up all night long because he was a jazz musician. And when the sun comes up, he goes to bed. So you can't do business with Quincy till after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's just the way it is. So I waited till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I called out to Bel Air, or up to Bel Air now. Yeah, I forget where I am, San Diego. And I said, and he picked up, and this person put him on the line. I said, Q, would you, if I could do for you what Alex did, would you be in a PBS series? I had no money. I had nothing, just an idea. And this is very important to the students. I just had an idea. And I said, would you be in it? And he said, could you do that? And I said, yeah. He said, does it hurt? And I lied and said, no, it doesn't hurt. I said, are you in? He said, I'm in. Now, who's his best friend? Oprah Winfrey. So I said, okay, man, you're in. I waited, beat. I said, would you call Oprah and ask her to be in? He went, no.
Witness dozens of bystanders recognizing his face and asking.
And there you have it, the truth. The truth. How basically he took really powerful people, told them a story, and of course, when you do that kind of thing, people start coming out of nowhere to do it too. Oprah's powerful. Everybody knows her. I love her. She's awesome. She's done good. But when you start taking famous people and you have them promote your thing, other people do it because famous people do it. So I understand why everybody got aboard the wonderful train called DNA testing. And there is some good to it. And I'll show you.
Specifically, those ancestors came from, you can follow the slave ship routes. Historical records from the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database show that approximately 25% of Black American ancestors were shipped from Senegambia, modern-day Senegal and Gambia. Another 25% came from Congo, Angola, the region encompassing modern Congo, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea.
That's the
West African region.
Notice that's the middle of Africa. We just heard what he said.
Regions including Upper Guinea, the Gold Coast, and the Bight of Benin accounted for the rest. Studies tracking mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed only through mothers, confirmed that more than 55% of Black American female lineages trace back to West Africa, with the remainder coming from West Central and Southwestern Africa. The DNA is a map, and for the first time in history, people can read it. In December 2024, a study published with support from Harvard Medical School analyzed the genomes of enslaved individuals who lived and worked at Catoctin Furnace in Maryland. The researchers found that these individuals descended primarily from the Wolof and Mandinka of Senegambia and the Congo of Central Africa. This was not just academic. The study connected living Black Americans today to those specific historical individuals through shared DNA. Henry Louis Gates Jr., the Harvard historian whose PBS series has helped millions of Black Americans explore their ancestry, called it a tool for empowerment. If you have...
See, ladies and gentlemen, once again, that's where you see that a man with an idea all of a sudden just happened to know the right people. And because he knew the right people, he used a tool that could be for good and bad. But more importantly, it's a tool that you're now giving away your personal information. And you really got to think about that. Like I asked in the very beginning of this video, are you willing to give me your credit card number so I can be able to go and fill up my gas tank? It's going to be roughly about $90. I just need 16 digits.
Fits the data. Then there's the Irish anomaly. Irish ancestry appeared at higher rates than expected, particularly in the mid-Atlantic and southern states. Ireland never operated a slave trade. Irish people were themselves victims of British colonial exploitation and forced migration during the brutal Cromwellian period. So why does Irish DNA appear so frequently in Black American genomes, at levels sometimes reaching 8 to 12%? The answer lies in indentured servitude and labor exploitation in the 1600s and 1700s. Thousands of Irish Catholics were forcibly transported to American colonies as indentured servants. Many worked alongside enslaved Africans on the same plantations. Intermarriage and sexual relationships occurred. Children born from these unions carried both African and Irish ancestry. Over generations, this genetic mixing became part of the broader African American gene pool. It's a side of history that complicates the simple black-white racial binary. Irish people were oppressed, Africans were enslaved. But on the ground level, in the fields and the quarters, genetic mixing happened in ways that official records never captured. The study also uncovered regional differences that challenged the idea of a single unified African American genetic identity. Black Americans in Louisiana showed higher French ancestry, as expected from the state's colonial history. But they also showed surprising amounts of German DNA, likely from Alsatian and German Catholic settlers in the Mississippi River Valley during the 1700s and 1800s. Black Americans in the Carolinas had more British ancestry than those in Georgia or Alabama, suggesting different migration and mixing patterns based on which colonies enslaved Africans were originally brought to. Black Americans in Texas and the Southwest carried more Spanish and Native American ancestry, reflecting the region's distinct colonial history under Spanish and later Mexican rule. There's no such thing as a uniform African American genome. The genetics vary wildly depending on geography, migration patterns, and which European colonial powers controlled the region at different points in history. What surprised researchers most was the African component itself. When they broke down African ancestry by region, they found that West African DNA dominated, as expected. But Central African, Southeast African, and even North African markers appeared at levels no one anticipated. The traditional narrative holds that most enslaved Africans came from a narrow band of the West African coast, primarily modern-day Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, and Angola. DNA evidence confirms this is partially true, but it also shows a far more complex picture. Enslaved people came from regions across the continent. Some were captured in the interior and marched to the coast. Others were sold by rival kingdoms or taken as prisoners of war. The genetic diversity within the African ancestry component reveals a history of displacement, violence, and forced migration that extended far beyond the coastal slave ports. Here's where the study results truly make no sense from a historical perspective. If the British controlled the American slave trade for over 150 years, British DNA should dominate the European ancestry of Black Americans. It doesn't. If the story of American slavery is primarily a British colonial story, the genetics should reflect that. They don't. If African American ancestry is a straightforward result of the transatlantic slave trade, the numbers should be predictable. They aren't. The DNA reveals a hidden history, a history of earlier Iberian and Jewish involvement, a history of Irish and Scandinavian genetic threads woven into the fabric of African American identity, a history that was never written down because the people who controlled the narrative had no interest in preserving it. The implications go beyond genetics. They touch on identity, reparations, historical memory, and how we teach the story of slavery in America. If Africa
And that's the point. That is truly the point. That's the one thing DNA did not do. It couldn't lie. It pulled up the fact that there was different things in there, different places. You heard it from him. The slavery trade was a lie. Didn't come from Africa. We were already here. We populated the world from the beginning. We are the out of America fact. And that's the point. So when somebody who looks like us goes to a prominent place and takes the fact of knowing the truth and twists it into the story that we've already been forced to learn and we just keep regurgitating it. It's easy for a gentleman such as he to take that information, know that information, and then create an empire. Started from nothing, and now he's worth roughly $10 billion.
I said, Rick, are you in your lab? He said, yeah. I said, is anybody there? He said, no. I said, when the results come in, make her Zulu, man. you know, I said, you back there making it up anyway. Nobody believe you could take some spit and figure out a tribe? What are you, crazy? So anyway, I was a Nubian and it was cool.
And that was his point. He was a Nubian and he was cool. Like I told you in the very beginning, when it comes to these DNA companies, you're giving your information to them freely. And once you do that, some will tell you that they don't share, as you see right off top here. They do. Yeah, right off top. They do. They share it. Here's a nice article I came across. I did a lot of backstory. I'm fair. I go both sides. I'm here to give you the truth, nothing but the truth. So then you can take this truth and begin to understand. For those who didn't see the very top, notice what it reads. You didn't submit your DNA. Your cousin did. Now police have your genetic blueprint. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the key to everything. I'm asking you for your credit card. But what if your third cousin gives me his credit card? You like to think in terms of it's just you. It's not. Everything in life is family based. That's why I support the fact of wanting everyone to go back, find your family, do your history on your family. And there's ways you can do it through your library. Ancestry, DNA, they actually have other sites. They have access to a lot of different websites. They come with subscriptions. Do that. Ask other family members what information they know about the family history. Do that. At the library, as I was saying, they have a lot of that for free through their websites. I myself, I used to do a lot of things at the library in terms of history. The library is still a good place, and you're paying for it. Why not use it for a resource? Learn your family. Knowing your family and taking care of your family is more important than chasing a dollar. Always. On that note, this is the Legend of Iron. Like, sub, hype, tell your friends, go find your family, get closer to your family. Now is the time. Take care of yourselves. Be something real and be good to one another.